24 hours after saying I do, my wife was already rewriting the script of our marriage. And let me tell you, I wasn't even handed a copy of the revised edition. We'd just gotten back from our honeymoon in Cabo. 5 days of what I thought was pure bliss. But looking back now, I can see the signs were already there. She spent more time on her phone than she did talking to me, always typing away to her friends about important updates and major decisions coming up. I brushed it off. Newlywed excitement, right? Wrong. The moment we walked through our front door, she was already on the phone again. Not with family asking how the trip went, not with work checking if she needed anything. No, she was talking to her squad about something she kept calling the meeting. What meeting? I asked, setting our bags down in the living room. She covered the phone with her hand. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Just some girl stuff. Girl stuff. After 2 years of dating and 6 months of engagement, I thought I knew what girl stuff meant. Shopping, gossip, maybe planning someone's birthday party. I had no idea I was about to get a masterclass in psychological warfare. That evening, while I was unpacking and trying to settle back into normal life, she was in the kitchen having what sounded like a conference call. I caught bits and pieces. Tomorrow works perfectly, and he has no idea what's coming. And my personal favorite. Trust me, by the end of this, he'll understand how marriage really works. I walked into the kitchen during that last comment. She quickly wrapped up the call. Hey, babe, she said, her voice suddenly sugary sweet. So, tomorrow afternoon, the girls are coming over. We need to have a little chat about our future together. Our future. I grabbed a beer from the fridge. I thought we just spent 5 days talking about our future. Wasn't that what the honeymoon was for? She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I'd fallen in love with. It was practiced, like she'd rehearsed this conversation. Oh, that was just the romantic stuff. This is about the practical stuff. The real stuff. I took a sip of my beer and studied her face. Something had shifted, and it wasn't subtle. The woman who had been playful and spontaneous throughout our entire relationship was suddenly talking like she was preparing for a business merger. What kind of practical stuff requires your entire friend group to be here? They're just here for support. You know how important they are to me. She moved closer, putting her hands on my chest in that way she used to when she wanted something. Besides, they've all been married longer than us. They have experience. Experience. The word hung in the air like a warning bell. Experience with what, exactly? With making marriages work long-term. With setting proper expectations. With, she paused, searching for the right words, establishing healthy boundaries from the beginning. I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the counter. Boundaries. In our marriage. That require a committee to establish. Don't be dramatic. It's just a conversation. But the way she said it, the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be an intervention. That night, lying in bed next to my wife of exactly 25 hours, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what was happening. During our entire relationship, she'd never once mentioned needing her friends' input on our decisions. She'd never talked about establishing boundaries or proper expectations. She'd been independent, confident, direct. If she had a problem with something, she told me. If she wanted something changed, she brought it up. We talked, we compromised, we figured it out together. But now, suddenly, she needed a support group to have a conversation with her own husband. I turned to look at her. She was asleep or pretending to be, but even in the dark, I could see her phone screen lighting up every few minutes with incoming messages. The group chat was apparently working overtime. The next morning, she was up early, cleaning the house like we were expecting the president. She rearranged furniture, bought fresh flowers, and even put out the good coffee cups, the ones we'd gotten as wedding gifts and never used. This seems like a lot of preparation for a casual chat, I mentioned, watching her vacuum the living room for the second time. I just want everything to be perfect. This is important. Important enough to vacuum twice? She stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was the look someone gives you right before they tell you something you really don't want to hear. Look, I need you to understand something. Marriage is different from dating. There are rules now, expectations, and if we're going to make this work, we both need to be on the same page about what those are. Rules, not agreements, not understandings, not mutual decisions. Rules. And these rules, they come from your friends. They come from experience, from women who've learned what works and what doesn't. I sat down on our couch, The same couch where we'd spent countless evenings watching Netflix and planning our future. The same couch where she'd said yes when I proposed. Now it felt like I was sitting in a courtroom, waiting for my sentence to be read. What if I don't agree with these rules? For just a moment, her mask slipped. The sweet, reasonable tone disappeared, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes. Then we'll have a problem. 3 hours later, her squad arrived. For women, all married, all carrying notebooks like they were attending a board meeting. They hugged my wife like they were greeting a fellow soldier before battle, and they looked at me like I was the enemy territory they were about to conquer. As they settled into my living room, arranging themselves like a tribunal, I realized I was about to discover exactly what my new wife meant by how marriage really works. And I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the lesson. The moment they all sat down, I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. These women had the energy of a corporate takeover, and I was apparently the company being acquired. My wife took her place at the center of the group like she was chairing a board meeting. The others arranged themselves strategically around the room, one on each end of the couch, one in the armchair, and one actually pulled out a folding chair she'd brought from home. A folding chair, to my house, for a conversation about my marriage. So, my wife began, her voice taking on this weird formal tone I'd never heard before. I thought it would be good for everyone to meet properly now that we're officially married. Everyone nodded like this made perfect sense, like ambushing newlyweds was a time-honored tradition. The woman in the armchair, who I recognized as the most vocal one from previous gatherings, pulled out what looked like a printed document. Multiple pages. Stapled. "We've put together some guidelines," she announced, "based on our collective experience in successful marriages." Guidelines. With paperwork. I looked at my wife. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious," she replied. "Marriage is a partnership, and partnerships need structure." The woman with the document cleared her throat. Rule number 1. Financial transparency and joint decision-making for any purchase over $50. I blinked. $50? It's about respect, another one chimed in. My husband learned that when he bought a fishing rod without asking me first. "A fishing rod," I repeated. $89, she said, like she was still personally offended by it. My wife was nodding along enthusiastically. "It makes total sense. We should discuss major purchases." $50 is a major purchase? I asked. The woman with the document continued reading. Rule number 2. All social plans involving other women must be pre-approved and discussed. Other women, I said slowly. Like female coworkers? Female friends I've had for years. Especially female friends, my wife said. Those relationships need boundaries now. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. During our entire relationship, she'd never once expressed concern about my female friends. Hell, she'd hung out with them herself at parties and gatherings. Rule number 3, the reader continued. Household responsibilities will be divided equally, with the understanding that emotional labor falls primarily to the husband to initiate. What does that even mean? The woman in the folding chair leaned forward. It means you don't wait to be asked to notice what needs to be done. You anticipate. You manage. You take responsibility for the emotional climate of the home. I looked around the room at these 4 women who had apparently decided my fate. Let me get this straight. You want me to manage money like a teenager with an allowance, abandon friendships you suddenly find threatening, and become a mind reader for household chores. You're oversimplifying, my wife said, but her voice had an edge now. Am I? Because it sounds like you've spent our honeymoon planning how to completely restructure my life. The woman with the document wasn't finished. Rule number 4. Weekly marriage check-ins to discuss any issues or concerns. With you 4 present? I asked. Oh no, my wife laughed. Just us. But I'll keep the girls updated on our progress. Progress. Like I was a project under development. Rule number 5. Social media boundaries, including no liking or commenting on posts from single women or ex-girlfriends. Rule number 6. Weekend plans require mutual agreement, with priority given to family and couple time. The list kept going. Restrictions on where I could go alone, requirements for checking in throughout the day, expectations about how often I should initiate conversations about our relationship, guidelines for how I should interact with her family. By the time they finished reading, I'd counted 14 separate rules. 14 ways my life was about to become a carefully monitored, pre-approved existence. So, My wife said when the reading was complete. What do you think? The room went quiet. For expectant faces stared at me, waiting for my compliance. I stood up. I think this is the most elaborate manipulation I've ever witnessed. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Excuse me, my wife said. You heard me. This isn't about establishing healthy boundaries. This is about control. Complete and total control. The woman in the folding chair crossed her arms. These are reasonable expectations for a mature marriage. Reasonable. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to regulate my friendships, monitor my spending down to $50, and have weekly performance reviews on my behavior as a husband. That's not marriage. That's a prison sentence with better decorating. My wife stood up too, her face flushing. These aren't restrictions, they're guidelines for respect. Respect. I looked directly at her. When exactly were you planning to respect me enough to discuss any of this before you decided it? When were you going to respect me enough to not ambush me with a committee of judges in my own living room? We're not judges, one of them protested. We're friends offering support. Support, I repeated. Right? Is that what you call it when you sit in someone's house with a printed list of demands? My wife's mask was starting to slip. You're being dramatic. Every successful marriage has boundaries. And every successful marriage negotiates those boundaries between the two people actually in the marriage, not through a focus group of outside opinions. I walked to the center of the room, looking at each of them in turn. Here's what I think really happened. You all spent months, maybe years, planning this little intervention. You waited until after the wedding, when you thought I'd be trapped, and then you decided to unveil your master plan for turning me into whatever version of a husband fits your collective fantasy. The silence was deafening. The problem is, you made one critical miscalculation. You assumed I'd go along with it. You assumed that because I love my wife, I'd accept being treated like a child who needs to be managed by committee. My wife's face was getting redder. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like what it is. For women who decided that my autonomy, my friendships, my basic adult decision-making rights are less important than your need to control every aspect of how I live my life. I turned to my wife specifically. And you've been planning this throughout our entire relationship, haven't you? Acting like one person during dating and engagement, then revealing the real agenda once you thought it was too late for me to leave. That's not. She started, but I wasn't finished. Here's your first taste of how I handle boundaries. I don't negotiate with committees. I don't accept ultimatums disguised as guidelines. And I sure as hell don't let anyone turn my marriage into a supervised probation. I looked at the woman still holding the rule book. You can keep your list, but you might want to add one more rule to it. What's that? She asked. Rule 15. What happens when your husband refuses to play along? The room erupted. All four of them started talking at once, voices rising, accusations flying. Words like immature and unreasonable and commitment issues filled the air. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching my wife's face as her carefully orchestrated plan fell apart in real time. And what I saw there told me everything I needed to know about who I'd really married. After her friends left in a cloud of offended huffs and dramatic door slams, my wife switched tactics. Gone was the sweet, reasonable tone she'd used during the group presentation. What replaced it was something I'd never seen before, and it wasn't pretty. You just humiliated me in front of my closest friends, she said, her voice shaking with rage. I defended myself against an ambush. There's a difference. She started pacing around the living room like a caged animal. Those women have successful marriages. They were trying to help us avoid the mistakes they made early on, by controlling every aspect of my existence. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for marital bliss. She whirled around to face me. You know what your problem is? You're selfish. You can't see past your own wants to understand what a partnership actually requires. I sat back down on the couch, studying her. This wasn't the woman I'd dated for 2 years. This wasn't even the woman I'd married 3 days ago. This was someone else entirely, and I was starting to realize she'd been hiding behind a mask our entire relationship. Explain to me how giving up my basic autonomy makes me a better partner. It's not about giving up autonomy. It's about showing respect. It's about proving that our marriage comes first. Respect, I said slowly. Like the respect you showed me by planning this ambush without my knowledge. Like the respect you showed by discussing our private relationship with your friends for months before bothering to include me in the conversation. Her face twisted with frustration. Everything doesn't have to be discussed to death. Some things are just common sense. Common sense like requiring permission to spend $50 of my own money. It's not your money anymore. It's our money. That's what marriage means. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Our money, managed according to rules I had no input in creating. She sat down across from me, her expression shifting to what I was starting to recognize as her manipulation face. Softer features, concerned eyes, the voice she used when she wanted something. Look, I know this is an adjustment. Marriage is hard for everyone at first, but if you could just try to see it from my perspective, your perspective, the one where you get to completely restructure my life without my consent and then call it partnership. I'm not restructuring your life. I'm trying to build our life together. By eliminating everything in my life that you and your friends find inconvenient. She leaned forward, reaching for my hands. I pulled them back. Don't touch me like that. Like what? Like you're trying to calm down a difficult child. I'm your husband, not a problem you need to manage. Her mask slipped again, just for a second, and I saw the flash of cold anger underneath. Fine. You want to do this the hard way? Let's do it the hard way. She stood up and walked to the kitchen. I could hear her opening and closing drawers, moving things around. When she came back, she was holding a piece of paper. What's that? Our joint bank account information. The one we set up last week before the wedding. My stomach dropped. What about it? I've been thinking. Maybe you're right. Maybe we rushed into some of these financial decisions. Maybe we should keep things separate for a while, until we figure out how to work together as a team. The threat was crystal clear. Agree to her rules, or lose access to our shared finances. You're threatening to cut me off from money we both contributed to? I'm suggesting we take a step back and reevaluate our financial partnership. Our financial partnership that involves you having unilateral control over decisions. She shrugged. I'm just being practical. If you can't handle the responsibility of joint finances, maybe you're not ready for them. I stared at her, watching this person I thought I knew reveal herself layer by layer. Each revelation was worse than the last. What else? I asked. What else what? What other threats do you have lined up? What other ways are you planning to force my compliance? She tilted her head, pretending to consider the question. Well, there's the matter of our social calendar. We have dinner with your parents next week, and that barbecue at your friend's house this weekend. I'd hate for those to become awkward because we're having marital problems. You're threatening to embarrass me in front of my family and friends. I'm pointing out that our relationship status affects our social obligations. If we're not on the same page about our marriage, maybe we shouldn't be presenting ourselves as a happy couple. The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost impressive. She was essentially threatening to publicly humiliate me unless I submitted to her rules. Here's another thought, she continued, warming up to her theme. My friends were really hurt by how you treated them today. They're starting to wonder if I made a mistake marrying someone who could be so disrespectful to the people I care about. And you're concerned about their opinion because they're my support system, because their husbands are your potential social circle. Because burning bridges with them means burning bridges with half our social life. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't a woman having adjustment issues with marriage. This was a calculated campaign designed to break down my resistance and force my compliance. You know what's fascinating about all this? She raised an eyebrow. What? 2 days ago, you were telling me how much you loved my independence, how attractive you found my confidence, how much you respected that I had my own opinions and stood up for what I believed in. I still do. No, you don't. You never did. You loved those things right up until the moment you thought you owned me. Then suddenly, every quality you claimed to admire became a problem that needed to be fixed. Her expression hardened. That's not true, isn't it? When exactly did my financial independence become selfishness? When did my friendships become threats? When did my ability to make my own decisions become immaturity? She opened her mouth to respond, but I kept going. I'll tell you when. The moment you thought the wedding ring gave you the right to reprogram me into whatever version of a husband you and your committee decided was acceptable. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning this bait and switch for months. Maybe longer. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of what was really happening here. So here's my question, I said finally. How long did you think it would take? How long for what? How long did you think it would take to break me down completely? To turn me into one of those hollow-eyed husbands your friends married? The ones who ask permission to buy a cup of coffee and apologize for having opinions. Her face went white. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't want a partner. You want a project. You want someone you can mold and control and manage until they forget they ever had a personality of their own. That's not. Save it. I've seen enough. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. Where are you going? To pack. Pack. For what? I turned back to look at her, this stranger wearing my wife's face. To leave. Because I may have said I do 3 days ago, but I sure as hell didn't say I surrender. The sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a growl. You can't just leave. We're married. Watch me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like myself again. I didn't leave that night. Not because I changed my mind, but because I realized I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made my next move. You don't walk away from a chess game without understanding your opponent's strategy. While she was in the shower, crying and muttering about how unreasonable and immature I was being, I did something I'd never done before in our relationship. I looked through her phone. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a group chat called Project Management. At first, I thought it was work-related, but as I scrolled through the messages, I realized the project they were managing was me. And every other husband in their circle. The messages went back months, way before our wedding. Some of them went back to when we were still just dating. Phase 1 complete. My wife had written 2 weeks after we got engaged. He proposed exactly when and how he predicted. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2, apparently, involved what they called conditioning. Subtle changes in behavior designed to test my reactions and establish patterns of compliance. Tested the financial control angle today. She'd written a month before our wedding. Asked him to check with me before buying that new drill he wanted. He did it without questioning. Good sign. I remembered that conversation. She'd framed it as wanting to be included in decisions that affected our shared space. I thought it was sweet that she wanted to be involved. Movie night manipulation worked perfectly. Read another message from 3 weeks before the wedding. He canceled plans with the guys to stay home with me. The guilt approach is definitely effective with this one. That night, I'd been looking forward to a basketball game with friends I hadn't seen in months. She'd mentioned feeling a little lonely and wondering if we could have a quiet night together instead. I'd canceled my plans without a second thought, thinking I was being a caring fiancé. But the messages that really made me sick were the ones where they compared notes on their different subjects. Update on Project David. Wrote one of the women from today's intervention. Financial lockdown is 85% complete. He hasn't made a purchase over $30 without asking in 6 months. Social isolation is at about 60%. Still working on the friend elimination protocol. David. I knew David. He was a guy I'd met at a few parties, married to one of my wife's friends. 2 years ago, he'd been outgoing, funny, confident. The last time I'd seen him, he'd seemed like a shadow of himself. Constantly checking his phone, asking his wife's permission for everything, apologizing for having opinions. Now I knew why. Project Marcus showing excellent progress. Read another update. Complete social media compliance achieved. No interactions with unapproved female contacts in 4 months. Financial transparency protocol fully implemented. Weekly performance reviews going smoothly. Marcus, another guy from their social circle. I'd watched his transformation too, but I'd attributed it to the normal adjustments of married life. I'd been an idiot. The messages kept coming, a detailed chronicle of psychological manipulation disguised as marriage advice. Remember, the key is gradual implementation. My wife had written in a message that seemed to be addressing the whole group. If you try to implement all protocols at once, you risk rebellion. The frog in boiling water approach works best. The frog in boiling water approach. They had an actual methodology for this. Post-wedding implementation should be swift, but not sudden, she'd continued. The first 30 days are critical. That's when you establish the new normal. If you can get them to accept the basic framework in the first month, everything else becomes much easier. I kept scrolling, my anger building with every message. Warning signs to watch for. Read a message from the woman who'd brought the folding chair today. Questioning the rules instead of asking for clarification. Refusing to discuss issues in front of the support group. Any mention of before we were married as a comparison point. These are red flags that indicate the subject is not properly conditioning. The subject, that's what I was to them. A subject. If resistance is encountered, the message continued. Escalate to phase 3 protocols immediately. Financial pressure, social isolation threats, and family embarrassment tactics are usually sufficient to regain compliance. Phase 3. I just experienced phase 3. But the message that really got me was from my wife, sent just this morning while she was preparing for the ambush. Day 1 of implementation today. If this goes according to plan, Project Jake should be fully integrated into the program within 2 weeks. His conditioning responses have been excellent so far. High confidence in successful completion. Project Jake. That was me. I was Project Jake. I scrolled further back, looking for the beginning of this insanity. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. New project identified. My wife had written over 2 years ago, right after our 3rd date. Subject shows high potential for successful integration. Independent, but not stubborn. Confident, but not arrogant. Financially stable, socially connected, family-oriented. Perfect candidate. Perfect candidate. She'd been evaluating me as a potential victim since our 3rd date. Project Jake Phase 1 initiated, she'd written a week later. Beginning subtle testing protocols. Will report progress weekly. 2 years. 2 years of manipulation, testing, and conditioning. 2 years of her pretending to be someone she wasn't while systematically evaluating my weaknesses and planning my eventual psychological imprisonment. I kept reading, watching my entire relationship reframed as a calculated campaign of deception. Phase 1 milestone achieved. She'd written 6 months into our relationship. Subject is emotionally invested and beginning to prioritize project manager's preferences over previous patterns. Isolation from potential interference sources can begin. I remembered that period. She'd started having problems with some of my friends. Little complaints, subtle criticisms, expressions of hurt feelings when I chose to spend time with them instead of her. I'd started seeing them less, thinking I was being a good boyfriend. Project Jake Phase 2 complete. She'd written after our 1st year together. Subject is now reliably modifying behavior based on project manager's emotional state. Financial transparency increasing. Social circle successfully filtered. Ready for engagement protocol. Engagement protocol. Even my proposal had been part of their sick game. Engagement achieved. She'd written the day after I proposed. Project Jake now entering final phase before implementation. All preliminary objectives met. Subject fully committed and unaware of true project scope. Subject fully committed and unaware of true project scope. The words burned themselves into my brain. But the final message in the thread was the one that made my decision for me. Project Jake implementation begins tomorrow. She'd written yesterday, just after we'd gotten home from our honeymoon. 2 years of preparation culminating in full system deployment. This is going to be our best transformation yet. Can't wait to show you all the finished product. The finished product. That's what she expected me to become. I closed the phone and sat there in our bedroom, staring at the wall, processing what I'd just discovered. My entire relationship had been a lie. Every sweet moment, every loving gesture, every time she told me she loved me exactly as I was, it had all been part of an elaborate con game. But here's the thing about discovering you've been played. Once you see the game, you can't unsee it. And once you understand the rules, you can start playing by your own. I opened the phone again and started taking screenshots. Every message, every protocol, every piece of evidence that documented their systematic manipulation of multiple men. Because my wife and her friends had made one critical error in their master plan. They'd assumed I'd never find out. And now that I knew exactly what I was dealing with, it was time to show them what happens when the subject decides to become the scientist. The game was about to change, and I was going to be the one writing the new rules. 2 days later, I executed my own protocol. But unlike my wife's 2-year manipulation campaign, mine was surgical, swift, and devastating. I called a family dinner. Both sets of parents, her sister, my brother. Important marriage announcement, I told them. My wife was thrilled, thinking I'd finally surrendered to her program. We gathered at her parents' house Sunday evening. Everyone was expecting news about future grandchildren or maybe a house purchase. Instead, they got a master class in exposing psychological manipulation. I wanted everyone here. I began. Because I've discovered something about our marriage that affects all of us. My wife was beaming, still thinking this was going according to her plan. I pulled out printed copies of the group chat messages. Every protocol, every manipulation technique, every reference to Project Jake and the other men they'd systematically destroyed. For the past 2 years, I've been the subject of what your daughter calls Project Jake, a coordinated campaign to psychologically manipulate and control me, planned and executed with the help of her friends. The silence was immediate and complete. I handed copies to both sets of parents. Page 3 shows her initial assessment of me as a perfect candidate for manipulation. Page 7 details the conditioning protocols she used during our engagement. Page 12 outlines the implementation strategy that began with yesterday's ambush. My wife's face went from confusion to panic to rage in about 10 seconds. "That's private," she hissed. "Privacy," I said calmly, "is something you forfeited when you turned our relationship into a group project." Her father was reading with a look of growing horror. "What is this about financial lockdowns and social isolation? Your daughter and her friends have developed a systematic approach to psychologically breaking down men after marriage. They call it project management. They compare notes on techniques, celebrate milestones in their subject's degradation, and coach each other through resistance." My wife stood up, her face red with fury. "You're taking this completely out of context." "Context," I replied, "like referring to me as the subject for 2 years? Like celebrating when you successfully manipulated me into canceling plans with friends?" Her mother was staring at the papers in shock. "Honey, did you really write these things?" "It's not what it looks like," my wife started, but her father cut her off. "It looks like you've been lying to this man for your entire relationship." I turned to address the room. "The woman you all thought you knew doesn't exist. For 2 years, she's been playing a character designed to make me fall in love with someone who was never real. My wife tried one last manipulation. I love you. Everything I did was to make our marriage stronger." I looked directly at her. "You don't love me. You love the idea of controlling me. There's a difference." Her sister finally spoke up. "This is insane. You're destroying your marriage over some text messages." "No," I said, standing up. "She destroyed our marriage the moment she decided I was a project instead of a partner." I gathered the papers and looked around the room one final time. "The marriage is over. I'll be filing for annulment tomorrow on grounds of fraud. She can explain to her friends that Project Jake has been permanently discontinued." As I walked toward the door, I heard my wife's voice behind me, no longer sweet or manipulative, but raw with desperation. "You can't do this. We're married. You can't just leave." I turned back to her, and for the first time in days, I smiled. "Watch me." The last thing I heard as I left was her mother asking, "What have you done?" What she'd done was underestimate the man she thought she could control, and now she was about to learn what happens when the prey becomes the predator. The annulment went through faster than anyone expected. Turns out, documented evidence of systematic fraud makes legal proceedings remarkably straightforward. But the real satisfaction came from watching the entire project management network collapse in real time. Within a week, David called me. "Did you really expose that group chat?" "Every word of it. Man, my wife's been in crisis mode for days. She keeps asking if I knew about the messages." "Did you? Are you kidding? I thought I was just being a good husband. I had no idea I was part of some sick experiment." The ripple effect was beautiful. Once the other men saw the evidence, they started recognizing the patterns in their own marriages. The conditioning, the gradual isolation, the systematic erosion of their autonomy. Marcus filed for separation 2 weeks later. "I spent 3 years asking permission to exist in my own life," he told me over coffee. "I forgot what it felt like to make my own decisions." The women's group disbanded completely. Hard to maintain a manipulation network when your subjects know they're being manipulated. My ex-wife tried damage control, reaching out through mutual friends with stories about how I'd misunderstood everything. But those screenshots don't lie, and her explanations got more desperate each time. She even tried the direct approach, showing up at my apartment 3 weeks after the annulment. "Can we talk?" she asked when I opened the door. "We have nothing to discuss. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling." I almost laughed. "Counseling? So you can learn better manipulation techniques?" It wasn't manipulation. I was trying to build a strong marriage. You were trying to build a prison. The fact that you still can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know. She tried tears next. Please. I love you. No, you don't. You love control. You love the idea of owning someone. But you don't love me because you never bothered to learn who I actually am. That's not true. Prove it. Tell me one thing you love about me that isn't something you try to change. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between us. That's what I thought. 6 months later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She was with some guy who looked vaguely familiar, probably another perfect candidate for her next project. She saw me and tried to wave, like we were old friends who'd simply drifted apart. I ignored her completely, because here's what I learned from the whole experience. Respect isn't something you earn by submitting to manipulation. It's something you maintain by refusing to accept it. My life now is exactly what it was before I met her, except better. I make my own decisions, spend my own money, maintain my own friendships, and answer to nobody but myself. The friends I'd started avoiding during her conditioning welcomed me back without questions. The confidence she'd spent 2 years trying to erode came back stronger than ever. And the best part? I now know exactly what to watch for. Those subtle tests, the gradual boundary pushing, the friend group that seems a little too interested in your relationship dynamics. I've actually helped 3 other guys recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. It's amazing how obvious the manipulation becomes once you know what to look for. As for my ex-wife, last I heard she was still single. Apparently, word gets around in social circles when someone gets exposed for systematic psychological manipulation. Her rule book became a handbook for single life, just like I predicted. Sometimes I wonder if she ever figured out where she went wrong. If she ever realized that the problem wasn't my resistance to her program, but the program itself. But honestly, I don't wonder about it for very long. I'm too busy living the life she tried to take away from me. And it's exactly the life I choose to live.